All right, guys. Hi and welcome. What I'm going to do for this second lecture now, this is lecture number 2. Probably kind of give you an update, each one just so you can keep them in track. Is what we're going to do now is start to discuss the origins of the American Revolution. Because, by 1732, we have the majority of the English colonies. They're formed, they're good to go. But what we're going to see is a number of events happen that start to cause, if you will, a divergence in the evolution of the English colonies, where they're going to want to develop differently than the mother country. They're going to want their own stuff, and all of this is going to culminate with the American Revolution in 1775. So what I want to do now is, the date 1660 to 1763, I want to take this from the first Navigation Act through the end of the 7 Years' War, which is the critical turning point. I mean, the 7 Years' War, I'll go ahead and give you the significance of it now. It's the critical turning point that will, lead to the American Revolution. It starts that chain reaction that leads to the breakaway. But that's getting ahead of the story. Starting off, we're going to have, the Navigation Acts, because understand, what's going to start happening is England decides it wants the colonies, to actually contribute to the mother country. It wants them to serve a purpose. It's no longer just settle because it's new, settle because it's different. Now they need to have a purpose. And we're going to see that by the 1660s, the majority of European powers, remember, everybody has colonies. This is a huge colonial venture that nations all over Europe are taking part in. They come up with this idea of what's called mercantilism. And mercantilism means that the colony exists for the betterment of the mother country. That the colony isn't about expanding the mother country. It's not about, duplicating the mother country. It's not about the welfare of the colonists. But instead, it's what resources can the colonies obtain, make, or produce for the betterment of the mother country. And so there's this idea that now that Virginia is profitable, now that Massachusetts is actually, prospering, things like that, now they need to contribute to the mother country. And because of that, England wants to make sure that these colonies buy only their goods. It's kind of a two-way relationship. What can these colonies contribute to, England? But also, these places need to be a market for English goods. So we get this concept of, with mercantilism, the Navigation Act of 1660. And this is mostly targeted at the French and targeted at the Dutch. And what it says is that ships that trade with the English colonies had to be built in either America or England. So a Spanish ship, say, cannot go and trade with America. A French ship, a Dutch ship, none of these people can trade with America. Well, what if, an American-made ship, goes and sells to the Dutch? Well, what they decide to do is say, well, 75% of the crew have to also be English-born. And so what that means is the ship has to be built by Britain. It has to be crewed by British people or American people. And what this means is the British, at the moment they're still English, 1707 we'll call them British. We'll come up with that name change in just a second. But what this means is that England wants to make sure that nothing happens to disrupt that trade, that all trade of the English colonies goes only to England. They don't want to lose any of that money to Spain, to France, to the Netherlands. They want to make sure they get everything. And so to help round that out, they create this list of enumerated goods, that things that Britain itself did not make could only be traded within the English system. And what that meant is things made in the American colonies or things unique to America could not be sold to Spain, could not be sold to France, could not be sold to the Netherlands. The whole point of this act is to ensure the American colonies are subservient to the greater English system. Now, what this also means is if, say, Holland, the Dutch East India Company, if they sell tea for cheaper, hopefully this, Pirates of the Caribbean, here we go. If they sell tea cheaper than the East India Company, and this is actually going to happen, what this says is that the American colonies can only buy that tea from the British East India Company. They can't go to Holland. They can't go to France. all of it is designed to prop up English trade. And so what we're going to see starting in the 1660s, continuing especially with the Glorious Revolution of 1688, is that England is now actually aware of her colonies. Imagine, if you will, that you just wake up, oh, hey, I've got these colonies. That's kind of what happens here. That these colonies had, been just founded for different reasons. They hadn't been royal colonies. The crown didn't care. But now, in the latter 17th century, the English crown wakes up from its sleep, realizes what's going on, and decides that these colonies need to be more properly administered. And what's really going to set that off is the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Now, a little bit of background. We had talked, if you remember, Maryland, the Protestants, the Catholics, they hated each other. Well, there's that Civil War, the English Civil War, and Charles I, he's ousted, he, gets the haircut down to here, beheaded, and the English Parliament that takes over, it's largely Puritan, but it falters, it fails, and the monarchy comes back. Now, Parliament, it's still mostly, Protestant, but James II, Charles's kid, who comes on the throne, he is a Catholic. And what's going to happen is the way the system worked, the way monarchy works, if you have a child, okay, you're the monarch, you have the child, and it's a daughter, she gets the throne. You have another daughter, too bad. You have another daughter, too bad. But then you have a son, and even if that son is the fourth born, that son gets the throne over the firstborn daughter. And that's what happens here. His daughter Mary is heir apparent. He has a son. Mary is Protestant. She's amenable to the English people. And when he has this son, there's this fear that now it's going to ensure a Catholic monarchy. So Parliament gets her and her husband, William of Orange. He's Dutch. They get him to bring an army over to then invade England. And it's also called the Bloodless Revolution. There's barely any deaths. And what we see is out of this, James II, he's gone, he's deposed. We see the dual monarchy of William and Mary, if you think of William and Mary College. But what we're going to see are three things actually, I can count. Three things come out of this. One, the Glorious Revolution asserts the dominance of Parliament. Absolute monarchy is done in the British system. What this means now is that, no longer can it be like, oh, jolly old Tim, off with his head. I have no idea what that accent is, but whatever. This idea that no longer can the monarchy, it's not an absolute monarchy. It can't do whatever it wants. Parliament is supreme. There's also now the issue that England asserts control over those colonies. We're going to see some backlashes going in the colonies. We're going to see some problems. We'll talk about those in a second. So England decides to make these royal colonies, to make them subservient to the British crown, and to ensure that these colonies now follow strictly English law. And that's going to cause a problem. The third thing is that William and Mary adopt the English Bill of Rights, and it creates this sort of constitutional, if you will, thing enumerating the various rights of Englishmen. And why that's a problem, some of these rights, right to trial, right to assembly, right to representation, stuff like that. Why it's a problem is people in the American colonies are going to look at this and they're going to say, we want this too. This belongs to us. Understand, you guys, I presume most of you are Americans, so America. If I call you an American, you're fine with that. If I were to call you an American in 1688, you would take it as an insult because you actually want to be known as an Englishman or an Englishwoman, that you want to say that there is no difference between you in, say, well, not Stillwater because we don't have that, but you in, say, Jamestown versus somebody in Bristol. There is absolutely no difference. And so to call you an American would be an insult and imply that there are two different things going on. And that's what we see here. And in part, we can blame what's called either salutary neglect or benign neglect. I've heard it both ways. And it's this idea that because the royal crown had not really focused on what's going on, it had not really cared that much about the American colonies, they got used to doing whatever they want. Imagine, if you will, okay, that you have a kid, and some of you might have children, so this could be really easy for you. And, you raise it a certain way, you let it do whatever it wants. If it throws temper tantrums, fine. Doesn't eat its food, fine. Misbehaves, fine. Gets suspended from school, fine. Whatever. But then after 5 or 6 years, you suddenly, hammer down and you say, okay, no, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it. This is now how you have to behave. How well is that going to work? Answer, not good at all. What's going to happen? They're going to, rebel against it. They're going to fight. They might not even understand. Well, we've done this the same way for years. Why is it now a problem? That's what happens in the American colonies. They had been used to governing themselves. Let's go all the way back to the House of Burgesses, 1619. It's now 1689. They have been governing themselves for 70 years. And now suddenly it's a problem. And so what we see is with the Glorious Revolution, with the ending of this benign neglect, there becomes that blatant realization in the minds of many Americans that there is a fundamental difference between them and the mother country. They don't know if it's good or bad yet, but they know there is a difference. And so we're going to see stricter royal governors. We're going to see the English asserting control, actually enforcing the Navigation Acts. That was the other thing. England would pass things like the Navigation Act and then kind of turn a blind eye to smugglers or people who broke it, or the fines wouldn't be that bad. Now they're going to actually enforce it. This last thing doesn't actually have anything to do with benign neglect, but I just want to throw it in to explain the name change. In 1707, we're going to see England and Scotland will join to create the Kingdom of Great Britain. And so what that means is now I'm going to start referring to them as British. Understand, if we look at Britain today, the United Kingdom, it's Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and England. To say English and referring to all of them is technically incorrect. And along with that, if any of you ever travel abroad, please don't refer to a Welshman, an Irishman, or a Scotsman as an English person. They're probably going to beat the crap out of you. Don't do it. British. And even then, they'll probably still get a little, pissy. But British is the more appropriate term. So what we're going to see is because of this assertiveness now on the part of England, we're going to see a lot of strains in the American colonies. And probably the most famous is going to be the Salem witch trials, where what's going to happen? In 1692, we're going to see a couple of things happen. One, you've got Bacon's Rebellion. I mean, there's stuff going on well before the Glorious Revolution, but the Glorious Revolution kicks it off. What's going to happen in Massachusetts? Governor Andros will be arrested and deposed, and the colony is going to be without a governor for about 2 years. Finally, there's this whole issue of declension. Remember what we talked about the Puritans and how, you have to have a conversion experience in order to become, to join the church. That they want to make sure it's legitimate, that you truly are touched by God, and that God has converted you into the elect. You are now saved. Well, the problem is their kids feel they can't measure up, and so they feel like they can't compete. So they have this idea of the halfway covenant, that you can be a member of the church, but you don't have to have a conversion experience, but it creates something of a societal schism. There are two different classes. There's, the older, fully converted, and now, I guess, the halfway converted, for lack of a better term. So what we're going to see is there's this fear of declension, that this colony is not being as religious. And so what happens is in 1692, we're not entirely sure what happens, but somebody I think the current evidence is there had been a fire, plants burning, creates a hallucinogenic effect. I'm sure we're all aware of things that can happen with, or that they ate mushrooms or something like that. But in any case, this one girl argued that somebody in the town possessed her, and that, not possessed, but bewitched her. And how it worked is these people, again, life and death, I should say after life and death, they took this incredibly seriously. So what happens is they go and they, accost the woman, try to make her confess, and it's a case of, well, we can kill you, or you can give us the names of people and you might be spared. Oh, well, in that case, I know this person, this person, this person, who are also witches. And it spreads throughout the colony. And it's men and women. One of my more interesting stories, actually one of my favorite, is the story of Giles Corey, who will be accused of witchcraft. And what they do is they take him out in a field and they cover him with stones. And they say, "We will kill you if you don't tell us what we want to know." And the guy's last words, they had so many stones. I mean, the guy is writhing in agony. And they say, "What are you going to say?" And his last words, "Give me more stones." And so they take another boulder, put it on his rib cage, and it crunches his rib cage and kills him. In fact, around 20 people are going to be executed. Many times more are going to be, accused or imprisoned. And the only thing that stops it is, this idea that somebody accuses the governor's wife. And quite frankly, I'm really glad politics in 1692 were not quite like they are today, because I could see a politician today, "Oh yeah, she's a witch. I knew it all the time. Take her away, burn her. Divorce on the cheap." All right, bad joke, but I had to do something. The governor puts a stop to it. He says, "No, this is stupid. You guys are idiots. No, not a witchcraft." And the whole thing falls apart. But what we've seen is that if we were to break down the accusers and the accused, all of the accusers live in one side of town. All the people they accused live in the other. I have no idea what this is. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Excuse the hand mannerisms. But it's this idea that one half of the town hates the other. And what's actually happening, it's not that there's actually witchcraft. It's not even there's necessarily a religious declension. It's that people are just nervous because of what's going, the English Civil War in the 1640s, the constant back and forth with the monarchy, now the Glorious Revolution. People are nervous, concerned, and it's that stress, and it finds violent outgrowths. And in fact, it makes them receptive. So what we're going to see is, like in the 1730s, a rise of guys like this, Jonathan Edwards, the itinerant preacher. We're going to see the Great Awakening. It's called the Great Awakening because people suddenly, once again, find the religious atmosphere. Itinerant preachers, these guys that instead of, big churches, they're going to go from church to church to church and preach to these really, really large crowds, trying to get them involved in religion again. It's done as an escapism from the problems plaguing the colonies. Were things in the colonies that bad? Probably not. But they're tied to the mother country, and the mother country, again, 1640s, English Civil War, 1650s, a harsh parliament, 1660s or 70s, you're back to a Catholic monarch, you've got Bacon's Rebellion in the South, then the Glorious Revolution, and then a near 50-year period of warfare from 1689 through 1748. So the colonies are feeling all of these effects. Remember, one of the things to remember about history is that nothing happens in a void. Everything is connected to something else. And so to try to do that, we're going to get guys like Ben Franklin, who is probably as bored in this picture right now as you guys are listening to me. But he comes up with this concept of an Albany plan. What if we got all the American colonies to unify, not declare independence, not become a separate nation, but join together as one large super colony? What's going to happen is in 1754, as westward expansion, we're going to see lots of conflicts with Native Americans. What's going to happen is the British invite, delegates from every colony to Albany to discuss Indian relations. And Ben Franklin, what he does is he pitches this idea of some sort of unity. Maybe, if not a super colony, maybe let's work together for taxation, for common defense. Let's coordinate our westward expansion. Let's resolve border disputes. Let's deal with Indian affairs as one colony. Let's not have Pennsylvania being nice, while, Massachusetts is slaughtering Native Americans and people in Virginia don't care. Let's have one unified American policy. Now it fails. And it fails because colonial legislatures, they don't want to give up their power. The British Crown is extremely paranoid and is afraid of, it's afraid that this will somehow subvert their authority in the colonies. So the plan falls apart. But why it's important is what we're going is, if we click back, we go from instability in 1692, excuse me, 1692 to now this, the first rumblings of maybe unifying in 1754, 60 years later. There is progress, as well as Ben Franklin is on the leading edge of people that in the 1760s and 70s will emerge and become, what we like today call the Founding Fathers. Those people that are going to take the initiative in creating a new, separate American state. Now, one of the things that's going to happen through all this, again, this whole idea of colonial warfare, because Britain is no longer the small runt. It's no longer the small kid on the block, but it's starting to get a large empire, and wars are popping up all the time. We're going to see 4 major wars in the colony, and I don't want you to remember all of them, except the last one. The French and Indian War is by far the most important. Now, those dates, those are actually the dates for the 7 Years' War. What we're going to see is these names here are the names of what the wars were called in the colonies. They would have a different name in Europe. I forget exactly what all their names are, but the war of, I think it's actually the War of Spanish Succession, the War of Austrian Succession. One's going to be called the War of Jenkins' Ear, because an ambassador will actually have his ear cut off. Vincent van Gogh, I don't know, but have his ear cut off, and so his name gets stuck to the war. But in the colonies, typically they're named after the monarch. So King William, after William and Mary. Queen Anne I. King George II. And so what we're going to see, 1689 to 97, then a brief 5-year gap, and then an 11-year-long war, and then a 30-year gap, then another war, and then, a 6-year gap, and yet another war. Understand, the colonies are in great turbulence, and as these wars are happening, and they're not starting in the colonies until the French and Indian, but the colonies are nonetheless drawn in. One of the other reasons why you're going to see so many wars is this isn't like a modern war where, okay, you fight a war, you take territory, and that's it. You resolve your dispute. This is more the idea of nations fight a war, there's a winner, then it goes back what's called status quo antebellum, which is Latin for peace before the war. You reset everything. The good part of this is, well, there's nobody who's longing to get back. It's not a case of what we're going to see Germany, World War II. You beat the crap out of it, it wants revenge. The downside is it means that none of the problems that started, say, King William's War are going to be resolved by Queen Anne's War. They're not going to be resolved by King George's War. So they're most certainly not going to be resolved by the French and Indian, or as it's known in Spain, in Europe, as the 7 Years' War. Here's a hint. Why that? Now, why the French and Indian War is the most important of all of these, and the one we're going to focus on, which, by the way, to help understand why, this is, just yet another map, similar to the one I showed in the last lecture, of just the various competition going on in the colonies. Now, the French and Indian actually starts here, but the others start in Europe and they spread to the American colonies. So that is the key difference. By the way, King William's War give an idea of how these guys are going to fight. Sorry, wrong way. But the French and Indian is important because it begins in 1754, and it starts here in the American colonies. We, the colonists, are actually the ones who start it. And then it spreads to Europe and becomes the 7 Years' War, and then has the dates that you now see. Which, by the way, on your ID term, I'll accept either 1754 to 1760, 1756 to 1763, or, if you want to do both together, 1754 to 1763. Either set of dates work. I'm not that picky. But it begins here in the American colonies, and it spreads, and it shows just now how important these colonies are, that no longer are they an afterthought while the various nations fight it out. Now the colonies themselves, they're not autonomous, but they're important enough in that sense of empire to cause the war. The other aspect of these wars, and we're going to kind of be clicking back and forth, so bear with me, is that war serves something of an imperial tool. For instance, what I mean is if you look at the 13 colonies, we're not really going to deal with Canada. Sorry if you're Canadian, but it's a loft apartment above a great party. I'm concerned right now with the 13 colonies. Then if you look, you've got Spanish Florida to the south. We don't have Georgia on this map yet, but Spanish Florida to the south. You've got New France, to the west, and to the north. And so there's this whole thing of, if you keep fighting wars with France and with Spain, you get the people scared about fighting these wars. What that does, it pushes them back to you. So if England, Britain, whatever, is always fighting with France and always fighting with Spain, it ensures the American colonies, because of that fear of invasion, will want to stay with Britain. And so one of the things we're going to see is that Britain encourages the fear that the French want to conquer all of North America. It encourages the fear that the Spanish want to encroach on that territory. That's why you need Georgia. And so what we're going to see is, until King George's War, the colonists support every imperial war. But by 1648, the colonists have had enough. They want to expand. They want to push out into these other regions. They want to move forward. They now see that Britain is starting to hold them back. And so it's this idea that things can only go the same way for so long. And the colonists get tired of it. They get tired of all the wars. They get tired of paying for the troops. They get tired of paying for the defense. They get tired of quartering soldiers, stuff like that. And they want a change. And that change comes, but not how they expect, not in the least. And we're going to blame this guy. You might know him better as George Washington. This is a portrait of, then Colonel Washington. He's in the uniform of a Virginia provincial. He's part of the militia. He's an officer. And what's going to happen? This man, who, we've heard, you've all heard, father of our nation, don't believe any of the lies about, I chopped down a cherry tree, I could not tell a lie. That's propaganda. We know him as the first president. We know him as the leader of the American army in the American Revolution. But right now, why he's important to us is he will inadvertently start the French and Indian War. This man will inadvertently start the closest thing to a world war seen in, before the actual World War. The start of the French and Indian War, it's 1754. And what's going to happen? It starts in the American colonies, escalates, and there's going to be some undeclared fighting. The French and Indian War, is technically never even actually declared. But by 1756, we see a general war in Europe. And how it starts is, Washington, he's out surveying, he's out trying to make contact, find out where the boundaries of Virginia are, and to make sure the French aren't encroaching. And on May the 28th, 1754, he sees a party of Frenchmen, and, he and his Indian allies attack. The problem is, this contained a French ambassador that was making his way to Jamestown, to the colonial capital, to seek out a delegation and talk to try to resolve these issues. Thanks to George Washington, the guy catches a musket ball to the face. Not exactly good diplomacy. So Washington, he wins this battle, and he, falls back and he builds what he's going to call Fort Necessity. And by fort, I mean they dig a few ditches, they're starting to build palisades, and then the French, by July, are on him. The French have more stuff there, they have more guys. Washington is inexperienced, he doesn't fully know what he's doing, and so what happens is on July the 3rd, rather prophetic, the day before July 4, I know, he surrenders. Now, what's even worse is when he surrenders, the French make him sign a document. This is the day when you surrender. It's not like you surrender and go to a prisoner of war camp, but you could surrender, and then you and your guys, without your guns, would be allowed to leave. That the army could stay intact, sometimes if you promised never to fight in a war again with that country, or at least in that same war. Pardon me. Well, he signs the surrender document, and it's in French. Washington doesn't speak French. And it says that he purposefully assassinated the French ambassador. George Washington is a confessed assassin. Yay, Assassin's Creed. Anyways, what this means is that now this is what the French have as a pretext to go and launch a general war in 1756. This does a huge damage to the British imperial system initially. Washington is not popular initially, though he will come back. And so what we're going to see if you look at this map, the French make they make a lot of headway, and you can see all of this disputed territory between Spain, between France, between England and France. And so this is a huge war. And I want to talk about fighting it because the problem is the British don't know how to fight a war in the American colonies. What we're going to see is the British send this huge army under General Braddock. Braddock wants Washington as his aide-de-camp, as his kind of advisor. And they want to attack Fort Duquesne, which, Duquesne, you can see it's over in southern Pennsylvania. In fact, if you look on this map, you can see a thing in Pennsylvania, Braddock's defeat. Now, the problem is, like I said, the British don't know how to fight a war in America. They're used to fighting like this. Shoulder to shoulder, they're using smoothbore muskets. They've got a range of about, if you're lucky, 40 to 50 yards. You have to fire in massed volleys. You need 200 to 300 guys firing their muskets at the same time in the hopes of hitting something. You have your one line here, you have your other line here, and they blaze away until somebody launches a bayonet charge and drives the other guy off the field. That's how they're used to fighting. But Native Americans thought that this was stupid. The term French and Indian doesn't mean that England was fighting the French and the Indians. It means they're fighting the French and their Indian allies. Understand, Britain had its own Indian allies. France has its Indian allies. It's two coalitions going at it. But like I said, the British are used to fighting like this. The Native Americans preferred what we might today call guerrilla-style combat. Use rifles, use smaller groups, fight in woods, fight in densely, forested areas. Make it where, British artillery doesn't count for anything, where the British cannot achieve their line formations. You can't launch bayonet charges into this stuff. And if they try, you can encircle them with people, just a third or a quarter their number, fire into them and cause horrendous casualties. And that's exactly what we see almost 1 year after the surrender of Fort Necessity. On July the 9th, 1755, the French and mostly the Native Americans attack. 70% of the British troops are killed, wounded, or captured. Braddock himself takes a musket ball and dies a few days later. And now why this is important is twofold. It shows that early on, the British are losing the French and Indian War. But more importantly, looking forward to the American Revolution, it shows that fighting a European-style warfare in the American colonies is problematic. That you've got all these woodland areas, it's ineffective, it can be costly. Fighting in densely populated areas against well-trained guerrillas is not going to work. Don't take that too far. Understand that we're kind of, unfortunately, starting to build into the popular myth of the American Revolution, of, British redcoats being sniped at by American militia in trees. Yes, that happened, but the war was won because Washington, with the help of advisors, wanted a well-trained European-style army. We'll get there in a second, but understand, this shows the problems of fighting in the Americas. And that is, relevant mostly to the French and Indian War, not after. So I want to talk briefly about the fact the war is going to spread. It takes until May 18, 1756, almost 2 years after Jumonville-Glen, before France will finally declare war on Great Britain. And what we're going to see is early on, military stalemate. The British cannot effectively win in the colonies and early on. Linear-style warfare doesn't work. Now with France declaring war, now Britain is having to actually fight on the mainland of Europe. And the war is really going to spread into something like a world war. If you look, you'll see that Britain will have its coalition of Britain, Portugal, Prussia. But they're going to be fighting the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, France, Holy Roman Empire, Austria and Hungary, Sweden and Russia. There's going to be fighting here. There's going to be fighting in the Dutch East Indies. There's going to be fighting in India. This is, by all accounts, a world war. But we're going to see this guy named William Pitt. And I'm sorry I forgot to grab a picture. Maybe I'll find one later. But Pitt becomes the new prime minister. And he realizes the importance of the American colonies, that this is where the war has to be fought and won. It started there, and if France's empire can be neutered and taken, then that will leave France in a major, debacle. That France is not going to be effectively able to prosecute the war, or at the very least, if war comes to a halt, there will be some sense of resolution. And so what he does is he drives in a huge amount of money, troops, material, artillery, stuff into this theater. What that means are twofold. One, we're going to see a breakthrough. This happens in 57. By 1760, the fighting stops in North America. But two, the British go into a huge amount of debt. And because of that, post-war, they're going to expect, Americans to start paying for the upkeep. That it now realizes it's too expensive for England to pay for the American colonies. The American colonies must pay for themselves. Again, that's a bit of foreshadowing. But here, what we're going to see is William Pitt puts all of this stuff into North America, and he wants a decisive victory there. He doesn't want, and he realizes you're not going to, despite all these battles, and if you look, you see a couple of battles, like Reisebach, in Europe. I kind of went brain dead for a second. In Europe, he realized you're not going to have any redress there. But the Native American colonies, that's where you can force a breakthrough, and here's a chance to actually end the problems. And so what we're going to see, and we already kind of talked about this, but this is just kind of codified for you. This is also known as if, the French and Indian War, as if the 7 Years' War weren't enough names. Now you have what's called the Great War for Empire. You have all of these people fighting battles all across the world. This is as close to a world war as you can get. And what that means, the war for everybody is going to be really, really, really expensive, especially for Britain and France. They're the two major powers going in. Just a little sidebar, if you kind of want to get a hint of what warfare was like in the 7 Years' War, if you go to YouTube and search for Barry Lyndon, I believe, First Battle. Barry Lyndon, it's a movie, it's set in the 7 Years' War. It's about this Irish guy who joins the British Army. And this particular scene I'm talking about, it starts off with a ship, and it quickly transitions to a British bayonet charge against the French line. And it will kind of give you an idea of the linear tactics of the day, as well as how ineffective they might probably have been in the actual Americas. That's actually set in Europe, but again, it's the same conflict. So for our purposes, not the 7 Years' War, but the French and Indian War, we see, the results of all of that stuff being pumped into the American colonies. It takes a toll really, really quickly. By now, the fighting shifts. I'm going to click back. Now we shift, click to this map. We shift away from fighting in Pennsylvania to, if you look to the top parts, you're going to see fighting, Montreal, Quebec, Louisbourg. And what you're going to see, these lines up near, the top right of this map, Amherst and Wolfe come in. They take Louisbourg. Then they, come down this river, and then Quebec, Montreal, and just start rolling up the French line. And they do so fairly quickly. July 26, 1758, Louisbourg falls. And once it happens, it's just rapid succession. A little over a year later, September 13, they take their guys on ships. They go and they land in Quebec. Now, Wolfe is actually going to die in this battle. But, what we're going to see is the British now have more stuff. They have the bigger navy. They have control of the seas. France can't bring in reinforcements. And so with the capture of Quebec, and then Montreal falls really, really quickly. 1760, September 8, 1760, the French army in North America gives up. It surrenders. The war in North America is over. Now what we're going to see is because of that, Britain wants to score something of a knockout blow in Europe. And so in 1762, it declares war in Spain. That's not so much important yet. But why that's important is Britain is pissing a lot of people off. They've upset France. They've upset Spain. If we click back to our World War map, Sweden, Russia, all of these people will eventually contribute money, arms, or advisors to the American colonies. Britain is inadvertently creating allies that are only too willing to take advantage of a chaotic situation brought about by the American Revolution. So here, what's going to happen? The war only has another year to go, and then on February the 10th, 1763, we see the Treaty of Paris, and this ends the war. Now, there's several treaties of Paris, apparently, and not just American, but world history. If you want to end a war, you go sign it in Paris. The two treaties of Paris that are particularly important for us right now. This one, the first one, ends the French and Indian War. The second, 20 years later, in 1783, ends the American Revolution. Now, what happens here with this Paris? It's acknowledged this is a British and Allied victory. The people they're fighting, Spain, France, Russia, the Mughal, they get nothing. They lose everything. Now, in Europe, that doesn't so much matter. But from a colonial perspective, we get this double paradox of winning a war but losing an empire. France, in this treaty, and again, I'm going to click back. Again, let's see. I know, I realize I should have plotted this better. Sorry. Look at all of this stuff. Okay, look at this giant green blob of New France. France has to get rid of everything. All of it goes away. They lose their entire North American empire. This seems like a great, great, great victory for Britain. What's going to happen? Canada goes to Britain. Everything from the Mississippi River east goes to Britain. And then, despite the fact that Spain was on the losing side, Spain gets what we will later consider the Louisiana Purchase. Yes, I know we're going to buy that from France. Stay tuned. There's some land swapping going on. But what happens? France loses everything. France is utterly defeated. They've got a huge debt. But this also means that France is really, really, really pissed off at Britain. This means that now, if there's any chance to get back at Britain, any chance at all, they're going to be more than willing to take it. Without France, we do not have an American Revolution. So that's the winning the war. But the losing the empire, we're going to see a number of things happen. This war is incredibly expensive. William Pitt empties the coffers of Great Britain trying to pay for this thing. And so with the view that George Washington starts the war, they believe that now the colonists must pay for their own defense. They truly believe that the colonists did not do enough stuff. Have you ever heard of Yankee Doodle? You might know it. Okay, forget Walt Disney. Yankee Doodle is, probably the ultimate American song from this era. It's going to be our main marching theme in the American Revolution, stuff like that. Yankee Doodle, if you know what a doodle is, Yankee Doodle means Yankee idiot, American idiot. The original lyrics were that, this guy in the United States buys himself a commission, goes to Canada to fight for the American nation, comes back a coward because he's afraid the French are going to eat him. I might upload an MP3 of that, we'll see. The British think the colonists don't do enough. The militia quotas are always down. They think the militias are stupid. They think they can't fight. And what this means is now the British realize that having this huge colony, what they need to do is station a large army in the American colonies. And they believe that as this is for the Americans' protection, the Americans need to actually pay for it. The Americans disagree at all. They think the American view is that the militias have been successful, that they had done well, and that they should be treated as partners in an empire. No longer are the subservient colonies, but now England and America something equal. But this isn't going to work well at all. The British this could not be further from what the British truly thought. And so we start to see leaders and politicians become dismissive of Americans. Start to be this idea, well, screw you and your representative assemblies. You need to follow our taxation guides. And so what we're going to see is that Americans believe that they are equals, that they are Englishmen, and that they are partners in empire. But the British believe that no, you guys are stupid, subservient American idiots that have no idea what you're doing. You're bumbling idiots. We need to station an army in your colonies, and you need to pay for it. Understand, they don't ask the Americans to pay back the debt of the 7 Years' War. But the debt of the 7 Years' War means that any army in the American colonies must be paid for by the American colonies. So that's that part. And then I already kind of briefly talked about this, is France wants revenge, Spain wants revenge, and so there's this whole thought of if there's anything that happens to Britain, because Britain has gone from the little runt beat up on by Spain to now Britain is this huge empire. We're starting to create that joke of the sun never sets on the British Empire. All of these people are going to want revenge. Britain has a massive debt. It's vulnerable to internal and external threats, all of this stuff. And so what that means, okay, I thought we were almost there, but I just wanted to check since I forgot the triangle trade. What this means is that Britain is now susceptible to anything going wrong. It's got a huge debt, and it wants to make sure it preserves its American colonies. But at the same time, you now have all of these European powers that would love to prey upon, any sense of discord. Consider this. France is an absolute monarchy at this time. Britain is not. Britain has, the Magna Carta. They have the English Bill of Rights. They have Parliament Supreme. France is an absolute monarchy. What does France care about life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness as espoused in our Declaration of Independence? They don't. They don't care at all. But if you can rip away profitable colonies from Britain, it's one hell of a giant middle finger to the people that so deprive them of their colonies. And that is why France will eventually get involved with us. But that is for another day. I'm not sure when I'll get that lecture. Right now, you guys are actually ahead. I know, right? You guys are actually ahead of my in-class 1103. I might do the next, go from 1763 to the actual outbreak of the revolution. We'll see this weekend. If not, I will drop the next lecture on Monday. Take it easy. Have a good one. And I will see you in the next video.